I have to admit, as a wrestling fan over the past 11 years, my relationship with TNA as a fan has been very hot and cold. It's been very love hate, if you will. There are times where I really enjoy the product that they put out, and then there will be other times that it frustrates me all to hell to see what the hell they're doing because I'm wondering what the hell they're doing. And that's how it's really been. It's been a real ebb and flow over the past 11 years with this company. And deep down, I've always wanted TNA to succeed, wanted TNA to get better, wanted TNA to grow, because I know the better off they are as a wrestling company, the better off the wrestling business is for us as fans and for the people actually inside of the wrestling business. There is nothing bad that could come out of TNA being a bigger company. Absolutely no bad comes from it. Only good. It elevates the pay scale for wrestlers. It gives them a more legitimate second option if things don't work out in the WWE, what have you. When I look at TNA now, though, it seems like it's a company that's just rife with problems. And I feel for a while now that there have been two people that I legitimately feel could really help save this company. One is Paul Heyman. And you talk about it from a creative standpoint, a presentation standpoint, a character development standpoint. There might be none better in the entire business than Paul Heyman. The problem is we saw what happened the last time he was in charge of a company himself and he was in charge of making business decisions and in charge of money. It ended up being disastrous. His ability to develop characters, his ability to come up with concepts and storylines, and ability to shake up the presentation of the entire wrestling business is unquestioned and second to none. But do you really want him in charge of your whole entire company where he has to make financial decisions? Not so much. But the other person to me has always been Jim Ross. Now, when we look at TNA, some of the biggest problems I feel this company has right now, they've been problems that they've had for a while that only get worse as time goes along. You've got an overaged, overrated, overpaid roster. You've got so many former WWE guys, a lot of guys, not quite as many as before, but still far too many guys on the wrong side of 30 or the wrong side of 40 or in a couple cases the wrong side of 50 or even 60. What happens is you start paying these guys a certain amount of money for a name that really doesn't mean all that much to you, and they don't draw nearly what they need to necessitate the money that you're paying them. TNA has also had a real trouble creating their own stars, in particular their own homegrown stars, their non-WWE related stars. Think about the last couple of years. What real stars has TNA ever created? And just in general, in 11-year history, what star has TNA really created? Like a real legit star. I think the company also suffers from a bit of an identity crisis. It lacks a clear-cut identity. At one point in time, I feel that TNA did have its own identity. It was trying to be anti-WWE. It was trying to be anti-establishment, and that was a good thing. They were presenting things in a different way. The way their show was structured was entirely different. But now, it's like you watch Impact and you don't know what the hell they're trying to be. Are they trying to be the WCW of the mid 90s? Are they trying to be a WWE light? Are they trying to be a TNA of old? It's hard to tell. This company, one thing it's really struggled with is promotion. There's been a lack of effective promotion of this company for the past 11 years. Their promotion and marketing is absolutely horrendous, which has led to a lack of overall exposure for their stars and for their product as a whole. I feel like TNA and the powers that be in TNA have lacked proper focus. Again, this is an outside perspective looking in. But from the outside looking in, it does seem like this company lacks proper focus. And sometimes, there are things that are out of TNA's control as a wrestling company. But it seems like right now they're more interested in pushing a Bellator fight than they are their wrestling product. Again, their focus is in the wrong place. I've always felt that TNA really lacked a true long-term vision. They're so curious of where they're standing in the weekly ratings. They live for them. It seems like they die by them. That they never really look at where they're going to be 3, 6, 9, 12, 18, 24, 36, 48, 60 months down the road. And that's something that's not good. When you're in business, you want to have both a short-term and a long-term goal, business plan, whatever you want to call it, business model. And it doesn't look like TNA really has one. This company really lacks direction. Really does. And again, this is where I talk about that lack of identity and having a bit of an identity crisis. When you lack a direction, you don't really know where you're going from one week to the next. You could be sitting here and going this way for a couple months, and then all of a sudden you're going this way, and then we're going to take it to a whole different level, brother. And then 3 months later, we're going to take it to a whole different level, brother. I mean, so this lack of direction, I think, really hurts the product, hurts the company, and affects fans' viewership and enjoyment of the product. And it really results, I think, all from a lack of steady, effective leadership. There's been too much upheaval and turnover and change in their leadership positions over the years, whether that be Russo or Dusty or Cornette or Hogan and Bischoff, Russo, whatever the case might be, Jarrett. They've really lacked that steady, effective leadership, that firm guiding hand that directs everything, has that long-term vision, has the focus on the right place, everything. It all gets kind of encapsulated in that. And what it leads to is really a vicious cycle of what I call stagnation. Just kind of staying where they are. It's like TNA has found a certain bubble, and they're not really growing and they're not really shrinking. The problem is, in the business world, a lot of times you could say if you're not growing as a company, ultimately you're slowly dying. And that vicious cycle of stagnation, I think, that TNA's been in really for the past several years, I think is slowly killing the company. And it is time for this company to either put up or shut up. It's time for this company to grow for the sake of the wrestling business, for the sake of the boys in the wrestling business, but most importantly of all, for the sake of TNA itself. And I really believe at this point in time, I firmly believe it, not just some internet fan BS, I firmly believe that the right man for this job, believe it or not, is Jim Ross. To me, when you look at Jim Ross's credentials, they really speak for themselves. He was a Hall of Fame commentator, one of the all-time great commentators. Nobody takes that away from him. You can't. I mean, when Jim Ross used to get excited, when Jim Ross would call a match, it felt big leagues. You guys know what I'm talking about. It felt like a big deal. It felt like the major leagues, like this is important. This guy cares. He makes us care, and that's what matters most. He tells great stories while calling the matches, and actually calling the matches, which is a novel concept for a lot of wrestling commentators today. What a lot of people don't know is that Jim Ross, for several years, was the Vice President of Talent Relations for WWE. The job Johnny Ace had for several years and J.J. Dillon had before him. When you look at Jim Ross and some of the people that he brought in over the years, going from the Mankind, he took a chance on a young Matt and Jeff Hardy. He took chances on a young Edge and Christian. There were several stars. You look later on, the whole OVW developmental system that WWE kind of helped put in place, and they brought guys in like Brock Lesnar and John Cena and Randy Orton, Charlie Haas, Shelton Benjamin, you go on and on. Randy Orton. There's a lot of Batista. All these guys came through that OVW system around the same time, and these were all guys that were ultimately brought in by who? Jim Ross. So a guy with a really good eye for talent that also understands how to develop and nurture that talent. He was the best VP of Talent Relations that company ever had by far. But another thing that makes Jim Ross really qualified to be the man to take TNA to a different level and help save this company is, with all the wrestling credentials that he has, of which he has very numerous ones, he's also a good businessman. And that's something that TNA really needs, is somebody that's a good businessman. He's made a lot of money for himself with his barbecue sauces and his beef jerkies, his cookbooks, etc. JR knows how to sell the JR brand. He knows how to be a good businessman. When you talk to him in person, which I've had the privilege of doing on more than one occasion, you can tell this man knows what he's talking about. He is a very good businessman. These are all things, both the wrestling credentials and the business acumen are things that TNA desperately needs out of its leadership right now. So what would all of that translate to for TNA? What ultimately would Jim Ross be able to do for TNA that other people in the past haven't been able to do? Here are some of the things that Jim Ross would be able to do that other people have failed to do for TNA, and these things would really help improve TNA both in the short term and especially, most importantly of all, the long term. He would focus on creating new stars. He'd stop signing the WWE has-beens and never-wases and rejects and focus on going and finding young talents and bringing them through a much improved TNA developmental system. Why do I say an improved TNA developmental system? Because Jim Ross would do the right things to implement an improved developmental system. He would do more to help out OVW, to make that a more important focus, more important feeding line, if you will, to the main roster. He'd focus on creating those new stars, both when they're down at developmental and once you bring them up. Stop focusing on all these old guys, these washed-up guys, and these has-beens. He'd help ultimately establish an identity for TNA, something TNA I don't think has had for the past several years, especially at any point in time during the Hogan and Bischoff era. He would give TNA its own unique identity, in part by increasing the focus on what's important versus what's not. Would he sit there and still maybe have to plug Bellator a little bit? Perhaps. But would he do a better job of making sure the things that needed to be focused on in the grand scheme of things were focused on versus the bullshit that doesn't matter as much? Like, for example, bringing in somebody, like a C-level star. Would he be doing that crap? No. He'd be focusing on his own roster or trying to bring in some type of A-list or even, God forbid, with TNA, even a B-list guy. Focusing again on what's important versus what's not. Bringing just an overall focus, an overall vision for where TNA is, where they want to go as a company, and how they're going to get there. Something they haven't had in years. I don't care what anybody in that company says. You can look from the outside in, and you can see that this company clearly does not have vision at all. And if they want to say they do, it sure as hell isn't effective, and they sure as hell don't have a proper focus on that vision. He would also bring direction, which is, I think, very important. It's good to have focus, and it's great to have a vision, but you have to have direction and leadership on how to get there. You have to figure out what the steps you're going to take to reach your ultimate goal are. And Jim Ross would be able to help focus on that. Now, he's also going to have a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, because he might not be happy with the way he was treated the last few years in the WWE. And he may not be happy with how he was kind of unceremoniously dismissed. So you bring in a guy with all these wrestling credentials for many years, dating back to the Mid-South days under Bill Watts. This is a guy who's worked as a referee, a commentator, vice president of talent relations for WWE, been a successful businessman outside of the WWE. You bring all of these other credentials to the table, and maybe a little bit of a motivation, a little bit of anger and animosity towards the WWE. You have a little chip on his shoulder. For too long, I think TNA has been afraid to say, we want to go after the WWE. And by God, we might never get there quite to their level, but we want to try and go after them. We want to take some of their market share. What the hell is wrong with that? That's how Business 101 is. When I hear like Hogan and Bischoff say, oh, WWE is so far off, we're never going to catch up to them. We're not even ever going to focus on them. Then why the fuck are you there? I thought that's what you were brought in for. What the hell is the point? The point is to try and be number one. You might not ever get there. I'll give you that, because WWE has like a 40-year head start as a company. But the fact of the matter is, to basically come out and say that you're not even going to try, that's loser talk. That's the talk of failures. And ultimately, TNA, even though it is still technically around, by and large, what it could be versus what it is, makes that company, in large part, a failure. Because of the failure in leadership and vision and direction and focus and so many other things from previous regimes, previous leadership. And what JR brings most importantly of all, maybe above all else, is he brings credibility and a chance. He has that credibility of his name recognition, his credibility of his accomplishments, his resume, his qualifications. But he's also not the type of guy like a Bischoff or a Hogan or a Russo or a Cornette that's going to be trying to put themselves over on TV a bunch. You know, if JR sat there and got on commentary, he's going to commentate about the matches. He's going to talk about the matches. He's going to focus the right way on trying to get other people over to improve the quality of the overall presentation of the Impact product. But even if he is strictly in a backstage role, he's going to be focused on doing the right thing. He's going to give this company a chance. That's the most important thing. That's what this company needs, is a chance. And Jim Ross can bring that chance. When you look at next summer, and you hear about CM Punk's contract being up with the WWE, you think if Jim Ross calls, CM Punk isn't at least going to, out of respect, listen? That's all it takes, is a phone call and a chance. That's what Jim Ross brings. Other people as their WWE contracts. And when you say, well, CM Punk will be a WWE reject. No, there's a big difference. CM Punk might be interested in a similar payday for fewer workdays and a less strenuous road schedule, and he's in the peak of his career right now. He's at the height of his power. As a result, that's not some other WWE reject being brought in. This is a game-changing, big-time player for the WWE, that the only person that could ever possibly maybe help facilitate that occurring is Jim Ross. Like I said, he brings this company a chance. That's the most important thing. Jim Ross is going to sit there and focus on the right things. He's going to focus on, if guys' contracts are up, he's going to make sure they're done, damn it, before their contracts expire. That's how you know TNA isn't focused on the right things. That's how you know TNA isn't running their company like any good business should be run. But that's what Jim Ross would do. I know Jim Ross is in his 60s. He might not want to do it anymore. But Jim Ross, I beg of you, I plead with you, for the sake of the people in the business, for the sake of the wrestling business as a whole, for the sake of us as wrestling fans, for your own legacy. Think about it this way. All the great things you've ever done. You've been one of the most important people in the history of the business in the past 20 plus years. Imagine how much greater your legacy would be if you really legitimately helped TNA turn that corner and they improved. And in 3-4 years, their ratings doubled and they became a much bigger company. And instead of wrestling their live events in front of 500 people, they're wrestling them in front of 5,000 to 800 or 8,000, actual paying customers every week. That's what you could bring to the table, Jim Ross. You bring that credibility. You bring all these other things I've talked about. You bring a chance. And that's the most important thing. That's what TNA needs. Jim Ross is the right man at the right time for this job. TNA, Dixie Carter, Jeff Jarrett, everybody involved. Hogan and Bischoff need to get the hell out of the way. Need to stop with all the other bullshit and do whatever you can to bring in Jim Ross. He can make the difference that you need right now and in the future. Give Jim Ross 5 years, and I promise you, your company is going to be so much better off for it that you'll be putting him in your little TNA Hall of Fame and speaking about him as the great savior of your company for 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Jim Ross is the man for the job. Please do it, Jim Ross, for the sake of everyone involved in professional wrestling. We need you for TNA.